Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jeremy Holston. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the director of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce of Illinois. We are super duper excited to have you here with us as we host tonight's conversation, Emerging Topics in the Workplace, D&I Strategy for 2021. This has been a conversation that we've now come to host, I believe, for the past 2 to 3 years, and it's one that has just really grown and morphed in terms of topics, the speakers that we have, and really just what we're covering. And so I'm excited about tonight's conversation and what we'll be able to share with you all this evening. For those of you joining us for the very first time, the LGBT Chamber of Commerce is a statewide organization supporting the voices of nearly 50,000 LGBTQ business owners across the state, and we're excited to have you as a guest this evening. We'd like to give a huge shout out to our event partners for this evening, Time Zone One. They are our dynamic marketing consulting company helping us execute an awesome 25th anniversary celebration. So we hope that you'll stay tuned throughout this year as we celebrate 25 dynamic years of supporting LGBTQ entrepreneurs and business owners. In addition, we'd love to thank our Rainbow level members, inQuest Consulting, for being a great partner in D&I conversations over the past few years, and definitely being a partner in this conversation and helping us to, again, make sure that we're providing timely and relevant content to move your D&I strategy forward. So thank you so much to both of those companies for their partnership and for their support. As I mentioned, we support nearly 50,000 LGBTQ business owners. We are proud to represent business owners who come from so many diverse range of industries, including finance and healthcare, insurance, real estate, personal services, and so much more. If you are an LGBTQ business owner, freelancer, thinking about starting your own business journey, I hope that you will connect with us and let us be a partner in your journey of starting or growing your business and joining this network of dynamic business owners as well. In addition to serving small business owners, we are proud to have over 30 corporate companies serving us as corporate partners and supporting the mission of the work that we do. So thanks to all of the many companies that are here with us today to take in today's great conversation. I'll give a huge shout out to the Comcast team for showing up in overwhelming numbers today to cheer Robert on. So thank you all so much for being here with us. Then also I'll give a shout out to our citywide Pride partners for helping to promote the event as well. So thanks to both of you for helping to make sure that we had great partnership and guests at today's event. And also a huge shout out to those companies and our partners who scored a 100 on the 2021 HRC Corporate Equality Index. So huge congratulations to all of you. And again, we're so excited to help you in your work around ERG engagement, supplier diversity engagement, or really just helping to build an outstanding inclusive LGBTQ brand here in Illinois. As you all know, and hopefully have been celebrating throughout the month, we are proud to also celebrate Black History Month. We hope that you will take the time to visit our directory to find out how you can partner with and support these Black-owned businesses who are members of our chamber. So huge kudos and good luck to these business owners for all the great work that they do. So be sure to visit our directory and support these businesses today. Very quickly, I hope that all of you will continue to join us as we host events throughout the month. You've already missed our awesome monthly group fitness class, though I hope you'll join us next month for our next session. Next week on the 23rd, we'll be hosting our annual celebration of Black business excellence. We'll be highlighting Representative Lamont Robinson, Allstate Insurance business owner, and also Mary Morton of Morton Group Consulting. And so be sure to be there. Vince Williams, president of the Chicago Minority Supplier Development Council, will return as our moderator for that conversation. And then next week on the 25th, we'll actually be hosting two events. At 11 a.m., we'll be hosting a workshop called Protecting Your Business, HR, and Insurance Compliance. So if you are a small business, not sure about what HR or insurance requirements or protections you need for your business, we hope that you will join us at that conversation. And then finally, at 1 p.m. on the 25th, we're continuing our reach or our outreach as a statewide organization. So if you know any LGBTQ business owners or allies outside of Chicago, we hope that you will encourage folks to join us then. We have scholarships available for membership for those folks. We're starting a business boot camp for folks specifically outside of Chicago. So we definitely want to make sure that we have great attendance at that event. So Springfield, Peoria, Bloomington, anywhere outside of Chicago, we hope that you'll help to make sure that folks are there with us that day. And then just finally, as I mentioned, this year is our 25th anniversary. We just debuted this awesome new logo here a week or so ago. Thanks to Time Zone One for partnering with us on that logo. Then also thank you to our sponsors for our 25th anniversary, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Illinois, Time Zone One, and Events with a K. For our corporate companies here, we love to have you as a partner in celebrating 25 dynamic years of supporting LGBTQ-owned businesses and being a voice of the challenge, champion, and change. And so thank you to those sponsors. So what are we doing here today? I am excited again for us to be able to host today's conversation around emerging D&I topics in the workplace. As you all know, last year represented some unique conversations and challenges that many of us were already aware of, but some of us needed some unfortunately, some events caused some of us to be re-enlightened again about some of these issues. And so I'm excited to have our guest of panelists help us talk about some of these issues, as well as how to make sure that as we continue to figure out this virtual world, what that looks like for our employees, and how do we continue to build collaboration amongst our employee resource groups. So with that, I am excited to have with us Gloria Cotton from inQuest Consulting. We've been very fortunate to partner with almost everyone from the inQuest team on an event. And so we're happy to finally have Gloria take the reins and to help us put together a super dynamic conversation. Gloria brings more than 25 years of experience in helping organizations be thoughtful about the work they do around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know that Gloria can also provide a much more awesome overview of who she is and all the great work that she does. And so, Gloria, I'm super thankful to you for all the work that you've done in helping to put together today's conversation, and look forward to what we will learn. I will now turn it over to you. And then very quickly, everyone, do be sure to post your questions throughout the conversation. I will be monitoring the chat box and collecting those. And then once we get to Q&A, I'll be able to read those out for the group. And so be sure to use the chat section. We love to see all the questions that you have. And so Gloria, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. It is so wonderful to be here. It has been such a thrill to look forward to this opportunity, but the planning in working with these three wonderful panelists, that has been truly delicious also. So I'm as excited as I hope our listening and viewing audience is, because y'all in for a treat. I'm just telling you right now. Okay, so Jeremy, that introduction that you gave me was plenty. If y'all want to know anything else about me, Google me or something, or go to inQuest Consulting and you can find out more. Let's talk about the people, the honorees of today, who are our panelists. I'm going to introduce them in alpha order of their first names. All right, so here we go. I'd like to say, you know what? Carlos Butler-Vale. I want to thank you so much for showing up here and working with us today. Let me tell y'all who Carlos is. Okay, just a minute. Okay, and so in 2019, Carlos joined McDonald's to serve as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm not saying all that anymore. It's going to be DEI on the company's global DEI team. In his role there, he supports Latinx partnerships, oversees the strategy and operations of the company's global employee business networks, and then leads the work and focus on the U.S. Diversity Council. The man is busy. Most recently, Carlos was placed in charge of facilitating the creation and execution planning of a refreshed global DEI strategy, resulting in the first DEI strategy to focus on the entire McDonald's system. I think we need to give some shout outs for that, which includes franchisees, suppliers, employers, communities, customers, everybody who can say the word McDonald's. And also the first DEI strategy explicitly leveraging the company's scale and influence to create what? Meaningful and overdue societal change. Y'all know it's so. Carlos is an advocate for inclusive corporate culture built on transparent and consistent talent and business practices, and ensuring DEI is leveraged as a strategic growth driver. Carlos, welcome. So happy to have you.
Gloria, I want to bring you everywhere I go. I think that you're like the best hype person ever. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And honestly, these panelists are fantastic. So looking forward to the conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Now, our next panelist in alpha order, Robert Rustman. Oh my goodness, Robert, we have all three dynamic people here today. Robert is in a world of constant change. Robert is a responsive and business-focused HR professional, and so am I. So I feel I really have a kindred spirit in this man. He has proven results in leading large-scale strategic initiatives designed to achieve optimal outcomes and organizational success. Robert is also known to his colleagues as a true HR business partner. That means he is knowing what he's doing and doing what he knows, okay? Robert's focus and passion are on ensuring fair and equal treatment for all teammates at Comcast. Over the last 6 years, Robert has been leading the Chicago region's efforts to partner with employee resource groups, yay, and HQ diversity teams to ensure that all teammates are visible. It's a hot mess when you are treated like you're invisible. You know what I'm saying? So thank you so much, Robert, for doing that and providing the same opportunities. Thank you so much, Robert, for being with us today. I'm excited to hear your voice and contributions also.
Hey, thanks, Gloria. Really appreciate the honor to be here, and really with Carlos and Veronica as well. So can't wait to begin this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And our third panelist, I have the honor of presenting Veronica Appleton. Let me tell you a little bit about this queen here, this royalty we have going on. Veronica is a scholar, DEI practitioner, wait a minute, and children's author. I got to get some of your books, girl, because I enjoy reading that too, you know? She serves as vice president of DEI at Omnicom Agency, the marketing arm. Veronica is also a lecturer of intercultural communication at DePaul University right here in Chicago, and a subject matter expert for various executive education programs in DEI, because you know we need it, okay? We really do. Veronica is renowned as a keynote presenter and speaker for some of the world's largest Fortune 500 organizations, and believes educating for the future is an essential strategy for building equity and communities and systems at large, which is why I'm so happy you're writing those children's books, because it's never too young to begin. Okay, we got a lot to learn from children though, so we'll talk about that at another time. Veronica's work has been recognizing Crane's business, on Fox News, and the Diversity Journal's top professionals in higher education. She's also a mentor and board member of several nonprofits, providing the woman is giving back and giving forward. You see what I'm saying? All directions, 360, and providing resources and impacts in communities of color, women, men, and children. You got it all, Miss Veronica. I want to thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Well, thank you, Miss Gloria. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited for tonight. I feel like we're going to have a good discussion. And I mean, I don't even know how we're going to top anything that comes out of our mouths. It cannot top the introductions that you just did. So I'm super grateful for that. Thank you.
Fabulous. So I want us to jump into this conversation we're going to be having so people can just experience why I'm so excited for the privilege of moderating this panel. So we actually have 3 different areas that we're going to be focusing on. And the first is virtual engagement of employees. How do you engage employees in your BRGs or ERGs or whatever you're calling them? So let's get down to the first question of that. And Ms. Veronica, I'm going to pose this to you. We have the JEDI Collective. What in the world is that? What does it mean and what is it? What do they do?
Yeah, no, so the JEDI, it stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I cannot take credit for that whatsoever. When you think about the Jedi mindset, right, and you think of engaging employees virtually, inclusion, intentional inclusion is key. There's an extraordinary organization based in California called the One Step Closer. And they have a Jedi collaborative, which has a primary focus on embedding justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion for the natural products and food industry. So it's not any industries that the 3 of the panelists are, well, except for the exception of Carlos working for McDonald's, the focus of natural products and the food industry, we could get a little step closer by taking that Jedi mindset. This approach, which is what I really want to focus on, it simply takes less of the kind of let's fix what's broken approach and really looks forward, which I believe is fascinating. And although I work in the advertising industry, I believe a lot of the tenets of the Jedi Collaborative is really helpful when we think about placing justice before equity, diversity, and inclusion. In addition to that, right, I think, you know, when we look at the systemic issues that do exist, we need that step-by-step model, the approach, the recruiting tools, the reporting tools, and how we establish benchmarks in order to understand the systems that do exist. And so I think that placing equity before each of the more common things that we've been discussing and placing justice before that, I think it really gives us an approach to take real action on dismantling those barriers that do exist because we know that they're there, right? And if you have an eye on it, you're able to explore the opportunities, the growth, the advantages, anything that you can take to kind of amplify the fact that systemic issues have existed. They have faced very systems for a very, very long time. But then you can also fix the problems that are facing the most sensitive communities. And I would beg to say that even outside of the most sensitive communities, it does creep into the established communities, right? Because we experience life the way that we see it. And we may come from those sensitive communities. And when we kind of grow in our careers and we establish roles within the workplace and we see these things that do happen, we have to commit, even on a personal level, that justice must be defined, it must be navigated and pursued on a proper basis.
Let me ask you a question, please. When you say sensitive communities, what do you mean by that word sensitive?
Yeah, so sensitive communities means those that have been marginalized, right? So many communities that look just like myself, right? Those that may include Black, Indigenous peoples of color. It may include the intersectionality of that, right? So we look at women and the way that they've existed, and we look at our trans community, we look at all of the folks that have been systematically marginalized because of the world that exists before us. So that's what I mean by sensitive communities.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
I wanted to clear that up because we're hoping all human beings are sensitive to each other. And what we're talking about is our sensitivity has to look at those people who have been
Absolutely.
marginalized. Yeah, that's delicious.
Absolutely, Gloria.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next. And Carlos, I'm going to ask you to jump in here with this one to answer this. You know what? We're talking about BRGs and yay, loving them, everyone. But what's in it for employees? You know, a lot of people don't even understand the depth and breadth of a BRG. So while BRGs are giving a lot in many companies, they're giving money to communities, those sensitive communities that Veronica was just talking about. You know, what about those other communities? What about those other people? People of color, yes, wonderful. But what about white communities? What are they doing for them? We don't want to leave anybody behind. So what is being done there? What do you say, Carlos?
Yeah, well, let me start first by addressing sort of the first part of it, which I think just generally we know that employee resource groups, business resource groups, or in our case at McDonald's, employee business networks, whatever you want to call them, absolutely, I think have been demonstrated over time to have tremendous value, not just to the business, but also to communities and to employees. And I think a lot of it really depends ultimately on the fact that you get out of it what you put into it. And so ultimately, you know, it really depends. If you want to be a member, I think it's a great opportunity. Even at just joining or being a part of events is a really great opportunity to give perspective and to get perspective as well. And I think that in this day and age, and I know Jeremy started talking about the fact that so much has been going on, and that has really sort of, you know, rekindled our desire to want to sort of learn more and to be a better citizen, you know, not just within our own corporate cultures or even educational spaces, but of course, you know, beyond. So I do think that generally there's a lot there. And you know, I think you're right. You bring up a good point. I think it's important that we're not othering others in the process of trying to be inclusive. And so that's one of the things that we really think about often is the fact that you know, you can go farther along in this space if you happen to have a really good foundation of allyship built into whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that that certainly is a really important approach as you're thinking about how you're going to obviously just connect and engage, you know, your white counterparts in the space. I'm a big believer that I think that diversity nor inclusion is really just something that is, you know, that's permissive for people who are people of color or underrepresented. I think all of us bring an element of diversity and inclusion to the room. And so, you know, oftentimes when I engage in conversations with folks, I try to find a common ground first and then create a safe space and then be able to obviously have conversations about what's different. And again, I talk a lot about that perspective taking, but that perspective giving as well. I think it's important to make sure that we're bringing those folks along because I do think that oftentimes they're the voices when we're not necessarily the people in the room. And so I do think that that's extremely important. And I will say that I think ever since probably, you know, things started happening with the protests and the riots with the, you know, for George Floyd, I've seen a really big shift take place where you have a lot of our white counterparts, whether it's white men or white women, that are sort of placing themselves in a situation where they're saying, what more can I do? Where is my gap? How can I understand better? And I'm not seeing as much of what I thought would be initially potentially a backlash or an issue where we were having folks basically come to the table as in past times and say, wait a minute, what about me? And so I'm seeing a lot less of that, and I'm seeing a lot more of, what can I do? Oh my gosh, like I'm going through this shock. I didn't even realize that I was so unaware, or, you know, that I didn't understand. And I think that's a good thing. And I hope that that continues. But again, we're responsible for creating those spaces to make sure that that continues to happen.
It is a good thing. So what would you tell those employees is the benefit, those people who are not members of BRGs, those of us who are, and we have a passion for it, we
Sure.
understand what we do. but other people who are not joiners or even naysayers, what would you say is the benefit of BRGs to them, the other employees?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there's so many, but I think first and foremost, you know, there's a great opportunity to connect and network both within sort of your immediate space, but also, you know, I always think of it when you think of head and the heart, right? I always think of the head first, and I think that I've seen so many great opportunities where people have been able to connect across the business, and they've been able to get their jobs done more effectively, more efficiently. And I think that's a great win all around for everybody. But like I said, I think it's that opportunity of being able to show up in the workplace. First of all, being able to show up differently in the workplace because of the perspective that you're getting and the perspective that you're providing. But then secondly, I think through those learnings from what you're getting from being a part of the BRG, I think it absolutely provides opportunities for people to be able to do their own jobs better. And I think it increases innovation. I think it increases perspective. I think it increases just connection to each other and the work. And who doesn't want to feel more connected? I mean, there might be people out there who may not want to feel, you know, very connected, but I would say that the majority of the people that I know, I think are absolutely looking for more opportunities to be connected, not only to each other, but to the company as well.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So Robert, your turn. I'm coming to you now, and I'd like to ask specifically, we have a lot of attention on people of color, marginalized people, as Ms. Veronica was talking about, people who are feeling not connected, as Carlos was just talking about. I want to focus on white people, and particularly white women, who sometimes don't feel connected to. And so, and not that all white men feel connected, but we're just focusing on white women who are thinking, you know what, I am behind all of the stuff that's going on, the focus on people of color, those sensitive communities, but truly, what about me? Are you not thinking about me anymore? So Robert, what do you say to those people?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'd like to just preface this really quickly by saying this is really my personal opinion. And I think, you know, based on what we've seen also at Comcast and with other research that I'm doing on my doctoral degree right now, is that we can see that white women feel that they may potentially be feeling left behind, and they don't know how to interact in the most appropriate way to be seen as, you know, the best candidate or the best person potentially for a job or even in their career. And so, you know, I think some opportunities that as DEI professionals we have is to make sure that we're also talking about how we can be inclusive of all women, regardless of your color, your you know, where you came from, any of that, to ensure that the white women at the table, as you can say, I know that's not the best term to use, but feel included in all parts of every business. I think, you know, with some of the research that I've been doing, you know, we've seen a lot of the white women say, this isn't an opportunity, this time frame has really made me think about what have I done wrong in the past, and how can I change that, and how can I make myself more known and be more of a presence to ensure that my other colleagues, you know, feel more included.
And so what would you add on to that, Ms. Veronica?
Yeah, you know, I think when I think about the offerings that allies can bring to people of color, I think the list can go on and on.
Yeah.
Right. I have many friends who do not look like me, and that is purposeful. And my mom, who was a single mother, she made sure of that too. But we need white women and white men to join the conversation. And sometimes it's not even a conversation. Sometimes I just need you to be in the room or the virtual room, if you will. Because it's important. I need to be able to see you. I need you to like a post if I post it. I need you to retweet me sometimes. I need you to call me sometimes, text me. Sometimes it's a simple outreach that is just so connecting when it comes to people, right? When it comes to knowing the relationship that you can establish. So I think it's very important that being an ally means a simple outreach. Now, I know allyship can look very different, right? Because it's not just the dynamic between Black and white, it's also the dynamic between Black and Latino, it's the dynamic between Asian and Hispanic. I mean, it can go on and on. As I was today drafting a communications piece for our company to address the attacks on the Asian community and the Pacific Islander community. So allyship is multidimensional. It is not Black or white. It is not gay or straight. It is not any of that. It is multidimensional. It's intersectional. It's intercultural. It is all the things that we say the world represents. And we cannot just give a simple nod anymore. We have to get involved. If you want to be a real ally, you have to get involved.
That's wonderful. At inQuest, many times we say for an organization, it's about creating an environment of allyship where everybody is an ally for everybody. You know, it's not just coming from the C-suite or the DEI people. It's not one group. It is everyone being impacted. So we've been talking about some practical, real things that you can say, here's what I have done. I want to ask you this question, Robert. BRGs, you know, are nurturing to employees and nurturing to the organization. But you know what? It is not only that. This is spreading the ripple effect in our communities as well to make a difference in the world. So here's my question. What can we do as BRGs and BRG members to support our neighbors who don't even work at the organization, but they live in our communities? Back to communities again. Yeah, you could put a sign in your yard, but we're not talking about that. We're not talking about that only. We're not, you know, how do you support all people, not only Black people? How do you support Black people, members of the LGBTQIA plus? How do you support these people that makes a difference in their lives? What do you say?
Yeah, so I think you know, being a part of an organization like this, you know, supporting our members of the LGBT chamber, but I also think about having our organizations really support the community and ensuring that as they, you know, are out there talking about what things to do, that they support the community. So for example, I'll give an example. Comcast has a new program that they started in November called Rise. And we are offering opportunities to Black-owned, Hispanic-owned BIPOC companies, small businesses, grants and opportunities to be to get their name out, to get their brand out, to help them with their business, and really support them. And I think that's an opportunity, you know, that we can see across not only Chicago, but across the US, that initiative is happening. You know, our opportunity that we've had from a Comcast perspective of helping in this whole COVID situation where families don't have the ability to have internet to connect their kids, and standing up these lift zones so that the students can go to these COVID safe places to do education and learning, right? Those are helping to support the community. And as a Chicago, you know, native, going to my local business and supporting those locally owned LGBTQ, Black, Hispanic, whatever you may call it, business, to make sure that my dollar goes to my local community, to make sure that my community thrives, is what I'm going to do to make that continue, right? Because if we aren't supporting our local community, what's going to happen?
It dies. It dies.
It dies.
Yeah.
the businesses will literally go away because they
That's right.
cannot afford to be there. And we
That's right.
can't afford that right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
So I love the practicality of it, and to let people know, you know, that there's validation for you as a human being, and we're here to help you. And I'm thinking about the wonderful work it does with those connections between organizations and the community for branding. You know, so talk is cheap. What have you done for me lately? I love that. So that's great. Carlos, I'm going to ask you this question. See, all that is very good, but I want to ask you this. Why are people seemingly afraid to say, you know what? We need to have more representation of people of color, more representation of women on our teams. And not only, my background is HR. Hello, Robert. It's not only having the numbers of people, but having them seen and involved and respected. What do you say when people don't get that? What do you say, Carlos?
Yeah, well, I want to start by acknowledging the fact that I think corporate America is sort of at this point of inflection where we have, I think, for many, many years, desensitized and sort of in some ways even removed the human aspect of human resources or people, you know, where we have really sort of put a lot of processes and policies in place to really, you know, create a separation between sort of the manager and the employee and the bosses and everyone else. And so I think what we're seeing now is that we're having a lot more of that kind of, the pendulum, I think is hopefully starting to swing in the other direction. And that gives us a really good opportunity to be able to then create the spaces where people can feel comfortable saying we need to have more people of color. I think that, you know, oftentimes when I'm working with, you know, some leaders both within and outside of, you know, of McDonald's, there's this sense that, you know, by saying that and by acknowledging it, you're disrupting the status quo to a point where, you know, you're now taking away from someone else who traditionally has had access to, you know, power and influence or opportunities. And so, you know, I think there's a fear of the backlash there, right? And I also think that there is a fear to also potentially be seen as inauthentic, right? And as someone who just simply wants to get more underrepresented minorities in their particular, you know, organization because someone's telling them to, or because it's tied to their compensation, or because it's, you know, it's what's being required of us now. And so I do think that, again, this is where a lot of the work that I do is around helping folks understand how we can absolutely continue to move the ball together and continue to do what we do, but do it better by infusing elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion into what it is that we're doing, and helping folks understand that, you know, this is a journey. This doesn't happen overnight. And I think, to your point, Gloria, one of the biggest things that I typically am most concerned about is the fact that you can try to do everything you can to bring in people of color, underrepresented minorities, including LGBTQ plus community. But if they don't feel like they belong, if they don't feel like they're included, if they don't feel, to your point, like they're seen and that they're heard, then you're really just, more than anything, it's going to be a leaky bucket. You're going to have a revolving door. And oftentimes, actually, it's going to end up being worse because those folks are going to go out and talk to other people that they know that belong to the same communities. And I know Veronica talked about the intersectionality, right? I mean, I can go to 5 different communities probably right now and tell them about a bad experience. And so I think that, you know, to start, we have to make sure that we're creating a space where folks can be authentic and they can really truly understand what the benefit is. I talk often about opportunities to create generational wealth and create upward mobility. And I think that even then, for a lot of the folks that I know that I work with that are allies, that's not something that they typically think of. And so when they understand that they're disrupting a system potentially in some way, shape, or form by continuing to bring that diversity onto their teams, then they're less afraid to be able to, of saying things like, we need more diversity on our teams.
Okay, yeah. And it is understanding that the system was designed so people wouldn't think about that. That's how
Exactly.
the system made sure it stayed firmly in place by keeping those people on the outside who were out.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to the next bucket. And Ms. Veronica, I'm coming to you next. And this bucket is about corporate and ERG possible responses to unrest and violence. And I'd like to say that didn't start in 2020. That has been going on because there has been unrest, and then many times that has led to violence. And what comes first, the chicken or the egg? But what do you say? How can we leverage the quote unquote hypersensitivity to saying the wrong thing? Many people, as I said before, have said, I want to do something, I want to say something, but I haven't had any practice. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to approach it. And I certainly don't want to say and do the wrong thing. So people think I'm not sensitive. What do you say to those people to bring them along?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things that come to mind when you think about hypersensitivity. And, I think people just want to do the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the things that you mean to say,
Mm-hmm.
right? The things that you mean to like literally verbalize, or the things you mean to do, right? So your actions, the things you mean to write. So even in emails, right, tones can be super different, and they can be super condescending.
Yes.
And so I think hypersensitivity is understanding that you have to know your voice, right? Knowing your voice is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And even in intercultural communication, right, or communication just in general, there are several chapters in many of the introductory textbooks that have chapters on language,
Mm-hmm.
chapters on nonverbal communication, chapters on verbal communication. All of it matters. If you are not conscious of the things that come out of your mouth or the things that you do, you're at risk of offending someone. It could
Absolutely.
be someone that looks like you that you could potentially offend. So I think knowing your voice is very important when it comes to being sensitive and understanding that where we've come from, right? Kind of the experiences that took place last summer, they weren't new to many people,
That's right.
right?
That's
They
right.
are new to a very large cohort of people who want to learn. And who want to embrace this moment of change, which I do believe is much longer than a moment. I don't think that it's going to go away anytime soon, where we have these types of conversations. And I'm really happy that people are embracing these discussions too.
Yeah.
So knowing your voice is very key. And I think that's with any conversation. It's
How do
not
you
even
get to know your voice? How do you get to know your voice? See, that's good.
by
The answer,
talking
but
to
the what?
people.
Okay.
Sometimes people are really afraid to just have a conversation about this, right? Some people are afraid to say, I need more people of color on my team. Some people are afraid to say, I need more women on my team. If you're afraid to say that, then that means that we still have a little more coaching to do. We still have a little more work to do. Of course, right, the educator in me is always ready for somebody that comes my way that wants to talk or needs mentorship, even young professionals, or even some, right, when we think about reverse mentorship, even some that are much older than me, they want to learn more about this subject as well. So I don't think that anyone is too distant from what we're talking about today. And
Yeah.
I think that the more that you become familiar with the the world that you're living in today, more familiar with it. I think that some people, right, there may be a very large cohort of people who know exactly where they are in this movement, if you will. And then there's some that are still trying to find their place and where they can add value.
Yeah.
So I think that recognizing your surroundings is like really, really huge, but also not being afraid to speak up. Because I think that even when you're hypersensitive, that's when you slip up. So if you are still just yourself and you're still able to just have a conversation with someone, and you know that person to be open, you know that person to be willing to have a conversation with you, I think that's very, very important.
It
So
is.
embracing your surroundings and knowing your voice, I would say, is probably the biggest, probably two takeaways I would give to somebody when it comes to being sensitive. To know
Great,
your voice is to use it. Right.
great. Thank
Hey,
you.
Gloria,
Thank you.
if I
Yeah,
may,
yeah.
I just want to add on to that. I mean, actually, just really more than anything, I think put an exclamation point on the fact that you talked about what I think is really getting to authenticity, right? And I think that that's really where you start to truly feel like you are finding your voice, when you can be in a place at a time in a situation where you can be who you are.
Mhm.
I think that that's one aspect of it, and not even and without any second guessing, right? And that really I think is the pivotal part of authenticity, is being who you are without second guessing what you're saying or what you're doing. And I think when it comes to, you know, sensitivity and hypersensitivity, it's also knowing and understanding that you are going to make mistakes. It's having that humility of knowing and understanding that you want to grow and do better. I
Mhm.
think that hypersensitivity you start to chip away at that. The more that happens, I think it's like when you're first overcome by the embarrassment of having said something potentially, but then knowing deep down inside, you know, your intention, and knowing deep down inside that you're being a learner when it comes to this. But I think for me as a DEI professional, finding my voice, definitely, in order for me to be good at what I was doing, I had to learn to not be afraid to say the things that needed to be said
So
when they
true.
needed to be said.
So this is where we're going, because both of you, Veronica and Carlos, you have mentioned that word safety now several times. So Robert, here I'm going to ask you, because if I don't feel safe, hello Maslow on steroids, physically, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, and I'm going to add spiritually, my whole spirit, I can't be authentic. So Robert, I'm going to ask you this question. What is it that I can do to create a safe environment so people can speak, so they can invest their voice? What are some practical things I can do to make it safe for real?
Yeah, so I think, very basic things are, think about pronouns. Think about in your signature, putting a
Mhm,
pronoun in your signature.
mhm,
A lot of times that opens the door for people to be more comfortable to say, this person maybe gets it a little bit and I can have a conversation with them, right? I think also being very cognitive of when you're on these virtual meetings and, you know, you're thinking about, um, you know, you don't have a mute button to hit all of the time. Sometimes things are on the top of your head and you just want to say them, but just take a second to say, is this the right place to say that? Is
mhm,
it is what I'm really saying going to affect anyone? Um, because a lot of times we don't think before we talk. Um, so really taking the opportunity to just think a little bit before you actually speak.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I think those are some basic things, right? You could do. I also think about what your background is like, right, on your virtual meeting. A lot of times people don't think about that, and a lot of times they're very offensive backgrounds that
Mm,
people put
mhm,
up.
mhm,
Um, think about the way, in a conversation with someone one-on-one who may be trying to have this dialogue with you about their feelings about maybe something you said, maybe something that was portrayed in a meeting, right? Just be open to listening. You don't have to react at that opportunity. Listen, and then maybe take a couple of minutes, take 30 minutes, take a day, and then come back to that person and say, I really understand what you're saying. I either apologize or whatever that may be for you,
yeah.
um, to really reflect back to that person.
Yeah, or to say I didn't understand what you were
Correct.
saying,
Yeah,
because
right.
sometimes that's not happening. A friend of mine said we all live on the same planet, but we all live in different worlds. So it might take me a minute to understand what your world is like if it's not mine. So that too is, you mentioned at the top of the conversation, we were talking about allies. And this is when you need to be an ally to yourself first before you
Absolutely.
start trying to
Yeah,
show
I
up
agree.
being an ally to somebody else. You know what I mean?
Hey,
Yeah.
Gloria, just one more thing. I think I certainly agree with everything that Robert said, but I think just one very simple and easy thing to do
Yeah.
is to just ask people, right? So like, how did I do? Hey, in this meeting, I'm not sure if I came off the right way.
I love it.
I think I may have said something that I wasn't 100% sure. And honestly, I mean, because I think too often we wait for that feedback, and it's too late. Like, why wait for a 360 to find out that you tend to cut people off in meetings, or that you tend to come off as, being someone who's doing mansplaining, or being insensitive to such things. I think just literally take the opportunity to say, hey, by the way, how did I do? I mean, my intent was to do this. Did it come
Yeah.
across that way?
Yeah.
And I think that actually shows more ownership and more like willingness than of course, when someone gives you unsolicited feedback, listen, right? But I think it's that act of actually going out and seeking that feedback that is tremendously valuable.
That is wonderful. And it says, you know what? I'm learning to not be afraid of talking about scary things. This is a scary topic. And so what can I do to lean into it? That said, Miss Veronica, I'm coming back to you. There are a lot of people, all of us here on this panel, see, we talking about, yay, let's all do it. Let's come together. Let's make it work. Some people are saying, you know what, I'm sick of this, okay? We've been doing this a little too long. We've been talking about this. Why can't we just go on? Why are we still talking about this? And so what do you say? And then on the other hand, some people are saying we haven't been talking about it enough. We need to go. So when you have those opposites, what can we as BRG members say when we hear people on one side saying it's too much, and on the other side, people saying it's not enough? What advice would you give?
Well, Gloria, I manage, sometimes it feels like I manage conflict resolution like every other day.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of times some of the feedback that I receive, right, to Carlos's point, how did I do? How was that? I love receiving feedback, and sometimes, and a lot of times, it's very unsolicited,
Mm-hmm.
but I appreciate it. And many times when I have these types of kind of polar opposite conversations, many folks would say, Veronica, you're very calm. Like you offer like a very calm energy,
Mm-hmm.
which helps.
Mm-hmm.
We're disagreeing, but we're agreeing in some kind of way because of like the way in which you're managing this conflict. So I think your tone, how you approach certain issues,
Yeah.
it can make or break a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like when you come to the table with somebody and you say, you know what, have a meal with me. And depending on how you say, have a meal with me, they may come to the table or they may not. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that with that very simple analogy, I think it's important for us to understand that who we are, how we use our voice, again, kind of going back to using the voice,
Yes.
your tone in which you use and controlling those polar opposites can make or break the situation. So
Yeah.
I think for those that say, I'm kind of tired of hearing about this, there's a privilege in saying that you're tired of hearing about it
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because you haven't had to really experience any of the systemic barriers that many people do.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
that are significantly affected by why we're having the conversation to date.
Yeah.
I think it's also equally important to understand that we just cannot forget the term privilege.
Mm-hmm.
We can't forget that there are just certain things in life that have been provided to certain communities
Mm-hmm.
less than other communities or
Mm-hmm.
more than other communities. So I think recognizing that is also important. So I think that when we do have these conversations, we have to be willing and ready to have them.
Yeah.
And also understand that opposition will come. There's even still people to this day still building the case for diversity within their organizations, still building the case to today.
And still some
Still
organizations that are not building it at all.
at building it at all, or
That's
saying, hey, we really are looking for culture fit.
Mm-hmm. That's
I
right.
mean,
That's right.
whoa,
That's
we
right.
still have some work to do. We need to be finding people that can add value. We need to be finding people that can change the chemistry of our teams, not fitting in. So I think when we establish that understanding, the polar opposite that isn't ready to have a conversation, they're gonna be able to come along for that journey. They're gonna realize that you'll get left behind if you don't come on the journey.
And so those are good practical things. I want to say that it's not only people of privilege though who have done
Of course not.
marginalizing who don't want to talk about it. Sometimes the people who have been marginalized don't want to talk about
Because
it.
they keep being remembered by it too.
Okay. So Robert, what practical tips do you have? I'm a BRG member, and members of my BRG, which is of people who have been marginalized, don't want to talk about marginalization. Let's just pretend it didn't happen. We don't have to know. Let's not review. What do you say to those people?
So I think, I'll share my experience, and maybe this will resonate with some people. Is I shared my personal experience as a white man, right? Not really understanding what other people have gone through, because I came up in a privileged life. I didn't have those issues. And so for me, I wanted to know, what was your experience like as a kid? What was your experience like going through applying for college? Just understanding what all of that was for you, so I could get a better understanding. And I think that has helped a lot with having conversations with my Comcast teammates around experiences that people have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
I think the word marginalization, I think, for me is, it's hard for me to say to a lot of our teammates, I don't know what you went through. I haven't experienced that, and I want to understand what you went through,
Mm-hmm.
and to be real honest and open. And we did some listening sessions here at Comcast across our entire enterprise, and we listened to all of our employees, and we wanted to understand where did they come from, what is going on, how does this affect you, from all levels of the organization,
Mm-hmm.
from our CEO all the way down to all of our frontline employees. And it was embraced by our senior leadership team, something that has never been done at Comcast before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really speaks to being an accepted teammate at our organization. And I think that is where a lot of companies need to think about how do they stand out to their other teammates and their other organizations. Is your top senior leadership involved? Do they really understand the message
Mm-hmm.
and understand what DEI actually means for the business,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, McDonald's is very lucky to have Carlos in his role, especially with what they just announced today. I think, that is what companies really need to do, right?
And
And
what
I
was
think
the
that helps with
announcement?
that.
What was the announcement today, Carlos, if people haven't heard it?
So as you mentioned in the introduction, I've had the opportunity to really the privilege to lead our global DEI strategy work. And one of the things that we really wanted to do this time around was to make sure that we were driving accountability from the top down in the organization. And so we are a blue chip company that is now basically saying that we are going to have accountability from the top. So 15% of our executive compensation will be tied to human capital metrics, which include creating, just leading through inclusive behaviors, results from an inclusion index, and obviously just overall representation and growth and development of underrepresented communities.
Fabulous. So it can be done. It can be done. We see it. And
Yes.
shout out to the companies that have been doing that anyway. Some smaller companies have been doing it anyway, pockets and larger ones. So we want to acknowledge that. And yay, McDonald's, for looking holistically at the organization. So let's move into the conversation in the third bucket. Ms. Veronica, I'm coming back to you. This bucket is ERG collaboration and intersectionality. First of all, I want you to say, what in the word does that word mean, intersectionality? And then talking about ERG collaboration. And let me just say before you begin, this is really a sore spot for me, because I see often that ERGs, BRGs, whatever, function as disconnected silos. And they're not helping, they're almost in competition with each other. And that doesn't help anyone. So what can, to my question to you, what is intersectionality? And what in the world can these ERGs do to connect with each other? What you say?
Yeah, no, I think intersectionality cannot be recognized without understanding the achievements from the early 1800s of how we kind of came to this system that we call intersectionality today. So the evolution of the term was developed by Dr. Anna Cooper, who was known in the 1800s as a Black woman who wanted to explore Black femininity or Black womanhood. And she first published her paper to recognize that you cannot see the Black woman without seeing her class, without seeing her contribution to labor, without seeing her intellectual development, without understanding her place in the world as a citizen in the democratic society, her level of education. So those were some of the earlier tenets of womanhood and as it relates to Black women. And so in the 80s, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, right, new student, professor in the making, and she said, you know what, I want to coin this term, which was a theory, intersectionality, to understand that it needed to be a real theory to see women not as separate from their race, not separate from their religion, not separate from all of the other things that make them who they are.
Yes.
And Dr. Crenshaw's paper was entitled Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex. Because for so many years, people would only see Black women as sex and race. They would never see them as kind of stepping beyond that. And so I would say that over the last several years, intersectionality has been coined by many others to see the multidimensional phases of humanhood, if you will, or humanity. So those are two Black women that I just mentioned that created this term that we know today, that has been embraced by nationalities across the world. And so it gets back to why intersectionality matters so much. It matters because it is a safe space where you can't be ignored as just one thing. I can't say that I am Black without saying that I am a woman.
Yeah.
Right. So I have to recognize both of those pieces of my identity. And so there's merit, Gloria, in having BRGs and ERGs and even diversity councils that represent the nationalities of those groups, because they are safe spaces where they're able to create opportunities for each other and to talk to each other about those issues and to attach themselves to issues that have the most effect in the workplace that relates to them. When you take something like McDonald's, right? And I'm familiar with McDonald's because I worked there in the past. and they have multiple groups, right? And so there's merit in that. AT&T, Walmart, Target, the list goes on of organizations that have multiple groups.
Yeah.
And so I do understand what you mean when you say, well, it feels like it's creating silos. Like, why would you do that? But I think that there's a very important piece to cater to that. So when you think about this word of competition, it's maybe in some workplaces, it may be. I haven't been to every workplace, but what I do know is important is that those spaces do matter when they are segmented properly. And not only just from a racial perspective, you see the intersectionality, right, in the LGBTQ plus groups, right? You see intersectionality in the veterans groups. You see intersectionality in the disability groups. So there's groups for certain things. And you can, even some organizations have faith-based ERGs or interfaith ERGs. So you can see the intersectionality there. So I think it you know, it just goes and goes. But on the topic of intersectionality, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, she has a podcast that's called Intersectionality Matters. So some of you have probably heard it. Some of you probably haven't, but intersectionality matters, and it does. So I think there's moments for it, and then there's moments for silos too, proper silos.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, I think, you know, having done this work for a bit, I think what I noticed for a long time in a corporate culture was that our ERGs, BRGs, whatever they might be, really were only talking to themselves as if they were a monolith, right? And so, you know, I remember coaching even our Hispanic employee, you know, business groups to say, not everybody here is Mexican, not everybody here is Puerto Rican, not everybody here is from, so it's like, but we used to sit here and basically kind of talk to each other. And I think that the moment that I remember hearing the word intersectionality, it felt like a box was opened. It was an opportunity to be able to recognize the person who identifies as a woman, who also identifies as a lesbian, who is also a parent, who is also Black, who may also have a disability. You know, it was like mind blown, right? Like, I mean, because every single one of those aspects, it changes the way that you show up, right? And so, you know, I often talk even within our African American Council about the fact that there's so much to be learned from some of our Black employees who are not yet Black parents and who don't know what it's like to have the talk from, you know, being the one to initiate the talk, but know what it's like to have had the talk or have had someone, you know, have the talk with them. And so there's power there in being able to recognize you as a Black parent, and even as a Black LGBTQ plus parent. And I think that that's how we start to break down some of these silos. And I think that we can continue to do that, and we should continue to do that. And because, by the way, intersectionality then creates an opportunity for that white parent and that Black parent to come together and join in on something that is common to them, which is being a parent, for example. So I do think it's exactly. So I do think it creates opportunities to be able to have more common ground.
That's good. And just a little thing, I don't say break down the silos. That's violent. I say connecting the silos. And so that is, we all do this together. Robert, I'm going to ask you the last question before we go to Jeremy for our Q&As. What can ERGs do to increase their visibility? What can they do? And how can they share with others about what they're doing in ways that people want to hear? What advice would you give?
Sure. So I think it really starts inside your organization to make sure that you're connecting with your other ERG leaders. And then externally, you know, looking up those companies and, you know, with Jeremy, right, in place, we've got our wonderful group here in Chicago from an LGBTQ perspective, but connecting with your other companies And what I've done is some grassroots efforts really about 5 years ago is I just called companies and said, hey, like who is your ERG lead for your Black employee network or your veteran network, so we can start that connection, because there really isn't like this group of that you can go to say, hey, this directory, and how can I connect with you externally.
Mhm.
I think that's one thing that we're lacking a little bit of, but
That's good.
those are some suggestions. Is grassroots efforts are nimble, but Jeremy has a great list of ERGs and here in the Chicago area at least.
I like that. I like that because we're so deeply ensconced in our own BRG many times that we think everybody knows. And you know what? No, they don't. So we need to start reaching out to bring other people in and to take ourselves out there. That's wonderful.
I think also inviting them to your events, like invite those external companies to your events. A, it's a great way to get your products and services in front of them.
Mhm.
B, it's a great way to connect with people who have different opinions than what other people inside your company may have. So,
Mhm.
we've
Good.
done that, I think, very successfully here at Comcast, where we've worked and partnered with external companies, but also internally, right? Not only thinking about where the state that maybe your ERG is in, but expand that to the entire enterprise and invite
Yeah.
everyone together.
Yeah, that's good. And I like just sometimes saying, how can we help you? How about that? How about that? Because they may have some ideas that they've been thinking about. I wish they would do this that we hadn't thought of. Jeremy, I know you're there. We have short time. What are a couple of questions, sir, that you have for our wonderful panel?
Awesome. Thank you all so much. That was really a great conversation. But I'll just go ahead and dive on in. We did have a few questions that came in just from our registration. So I'll ask one of those first, and then I'll dive into some of the chat section questions.
Okay.
And Veronica, I'll ask you this question since you are in communications. This person said, as a writer, how can I make sure I include accurate voices of diversity for those with different backgrounds than myself? So how do I make sure as a writer that other voices are heard and those voices are reflected in my writing?
Yeah, no, this is a really good question and I love it. And hopefully you can't hear the sirens, so I apologize for that. Um, when we think about how to write and how to be inclusive in our writing, people often talk about this, right? Many folks, they kind of get in trouble for the things that they say. They get in trouble for the things that they may mention in the world of literature. So I think one of the things that we can think about is telling the stories of the people that you want to feature. I think that the way in which you can learn the best is by talking to people and letting their voices tell the story. That you are more of a very objective voice in the room, a very objective writer in the room, and you allow their voices to tell the story. So I know it's easy for someone to say, "Oh yeah, well I've combated all of my implicit attitudes and beliefs and bias. I'm not biased at all anymore." Um, that may not be the fact, right? So I think that if you allow yourself to be removed, right? I know that just kind of like a small vignette. I was watching a video of the late Cicely Tyson, who played Miss Jane Pittman. And what she said was she completely removed herself as Cicely Tyson and she became Miss Jane Pittman. Like literally, she thought Jane Pittman, she acted like Jane Pittman. She was so ingrained in that character that she was no longer herself. So I think as a writer, you have to be so ingrained in the people that you're featuring that you lose yourself in the process of your work. Today is also the birthday of the great Toni Morrison, who's another writer. And she would often say, right, this was not necessarily the career that I was going to have. She didn't even know that she was going to be a writer until she started writing. and then she started writing these very provocative works. And that was what made sense. She embraced the characters in her story so much that she removed herself. So
Yeah.
that means that she removed her bias too. So I think going back to what Carlos and Robert and even Gloria said earlier, recognizing that getting out there and doing the work is the best way that you can combat any form of bias, any form of, hey, I just don't get it, any form of communication apprehension, any form of anxiety or paranoia. I saw the conversation in the chat. So start writing and then marry yourself to the characters that you're featuring or the people that you're featuring. So then they tell the story for you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeremy, what's another question you have?
Sure. This one we'll ask Carlos, and we got this question from Tiffany. We sometimes find that members of underrepresented groups feel that there can only be one of us at the table because only a handful break that barrier. What are some thoughts that you have on how members can be better allies to each other?
Oof, yeah, I mean that's a great question. And typically what I do is I start off by asking who is already in the room. I mean, there are times where I get invited to a meeting and I look at the list of attendees just to see who is invited. And I purposely then go back to the meeting organizer and say, hey, we should also have X, Y, and Z in the room as well. I think that they have some really great perspective that they can bring to the table. Would you mind if I went ahead and forwarded that invitation? And I think that that's really important. It's not always necessarily feasible. I mean, I think it depends on the topic. I mean, I know that sometimes some things are sensitive and, only certain folks can be there. But I think that that's where, one of my old bosses said that 80% of what's said about you is said when you're not in the room. And so I think that that's where it's really important. So even if you can't have that person or those people in the room with you, I think it's really about making sure you're giving them the accolades, the visibility, the recognition, because, even one time hearing someone's name, I think can spark tremendous opportunities. And so, I think for me, especially in this virtual environment, there's such simple ways, I think, to be able to do that. And, sometimes I have actually explicitly called out the fact that I am the only X or the only Y in the room. And provided you create that safe space to be able to do that, sometimes it gives people an opportunity to do some reflecting and say, hey, you know what? Actually, he's right. We could probably do it a little bit more. And I'll say it respectfully, I'll say it kindly, because I think sometimes you have to assume that, especially in this space, I could not be a good DEI practitioner if I walked into every room automatically assuming that everyone is ill-intended, right? And so I walk in and I think, okay, maybe this was just an oversight, and I give people the benefit of the doubt. Now, if they do that multiple times, then I'm going to start asking some hard questions. But I think that even just calling out something like that, honestly, as long as you're doing it from the perspective of saying, having these folks XYZ in the room, actually, could provide some really great perspective, I think goes a long way.
So here's what I appreciate about what you said. It is, I need to develop some new habits. It's easy for me to do what I've always done the way I've always done it. And by your calling that out and using your privilege, because you're in the room and you have my ear to say, wait a moment, planting that seed, that's a good practical thing that you don't need an edict or a new policy to do. That's wonderful. Thank you. Jeremy, one more question.
Yes. I'm also going to ask all of our panelists, Gloria included. It seems like we still have some great questions. I know we won't get to them all. So if you can, be sure to drop your LinkedIn in the chat box. That way folks can follow up with you and continue the conversation with you.
Okay.
So Robert, I guess we'll give you this question. Our friend Jessica, she has a friend who works at another company, and she's wanting to start an ERG at that company. However, they are experiencing a lot of skepticism. It's not, I can see it, but
Skepticism.
it's not coming out right now. They're experiencing it a lot from upper management about if employees will be interested, if they'll show up, if they'll be engaged. But they're feeling discouraged about some of that feedback they're hearing from upper management. What would you say about that struggle? How do we push back on some of what we're hearing from upper management?
Yeah, I think, Comcast recently, about 8 years ago, got ERGs, right? Our friends at NBC Universal have had them for 25 years, but our Comcast family didn't. Upper management thought that they weren't necessary. And what was the real business need to have ERGs? And I think that that is really where you have to connect the dots for your leaders, is the business need for why employee resource groups will not only benefit your bottom line, right, but ultimately your employee experience
Mm-hmm.
and how employees really value you as an overall organization.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the key, I think, fundamentals to really making sure. And that's what we did. It was to drive that with our Comcast senior leadership team, and they got it, right? Because once you showed the ROI, that was an easy sell for the business.
So what does they got it mean? What else did they do?
Yeah, I think, it's a downhill effect, right? You have to have somebody to run your ERGs, right? So you have to stand up a diversity team to be able to help manage the ERGs, right? So the whole DEI piece then starts flowing into those conversations as, where can we start as a company to make sure that we continue this evolution?
Yeah. Thank you.
I
Ongoing
can I
conversation. I like that.
yeah
Jeremy.
can I say that I think really quickly, it's important to know your audience, and I've learned that in this space, some are guided by the heart and doing the right thing, and some are guided by the head and doing what makes good business sense. And so, I think to Robert's point about even getting someone to make those investments or to even show up to events or to be seen. I mean, I think that those are there's a lot there. But I would start with, there's a lot of really great research out there that talks about the fact that employee resource groups really help lead to great retention outcomes. And there's also really great quantitative research on the dollar impact, right? And in some cases, it could be upwards of $10,000 that you are saving per person by retaining them in your organization. But then there's also
More.
exactly. That's just on onboarding costs typically, right? But then also there's great research by McKinsey that talks about the fact that sales teams are typically able to 70% more likely to capture new markets. That 87% of, and probably higher now, of job applicants are looking to be in a diverse and inclusive workplace. And so there's a lot out there, and I think that what I've come to realize about this is that it's one thing when you're the person that's making the pitch, you have to know what you're talking about, but you don't always have to be the one to actually sit here and make all the points. I think there's a lot of really great research out there that will actually help make those points for you.
That's great. Jeremy, I think we're just about out of time. So how would you like to end our time together?
I'm going to end our time by thanking all of you for being such dynamic participants for tonight's conversation. This was really a great conversation for myself and from the chat section for others as well. For those of you who did not get your questions answered, I definitely encourage you to reach out to Gloria and her team at inQuest Consulting. They are definitely great partners in your company in helping your ERG build out some programming and some strategy, as well as some D&I strategy as well. So obviously we saw all that great spirit that she brought tonight. So you can imagine what it would be like having her as a full-time partner, helping you create some dynamic strategy at your company. So Gloria, thank you so much. And we're excited to continue working with you. Robert, Veronica, and Carlos, all of your insight was absolutely amazing. I hope that everyone continues to work with you, reach out to you, and build partnerships with your companies. And we're also excited to be members and partners with you to continue making sure that LGBTQ business owners, employees, and others continue to have access to phenomenal supplier diversity and just employment opportunities. And Veronica, you've just been awesome since you've been around our circle. So we appreciate you for being here with us. And so everyone, we look forward to seeing you in the future at upcoming events. Thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to having you as we celebrate our 25th anniversary throughout the rest of the year. So have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks,
Thank
team.
you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.